think I probably spent way too much time, childhood, teens, 20s, um, trying to create a version of myself outwardly that other people would approve of. And, operating not wholly. I think I did a pretty good job, but definitely, was, I would, I don't know if I was always showing up as my authentic self for reasons of wanting to fit in or whatever. And I think the freedom that comes with success, and I assume at some point age, is you get the ultimate validation of you are who you are, and then everybody kind of approves of you, and it gives you the space and freedom to kind of be your true self.
Welcome to Inside the Circle, a series of conversations from Sangha. We sit down with our members and together we explore the practice of living fully in the modern world while staying connected to something deeper within. Through community, shared inquiry, and inner work, Sangha is an exploration into what becomes possible when we walk that path together in fellowship. The practice of living in the world but not being fully of it. To learn more about Sangha and our growing network of circles around the world, visit www.sangha.one. Welcome to this conversation with David Heath. Dave is the co-founder and executive chairman of Bombas. He served as the CEO from the company's founding through May 2025, building Bombas to a purpose-driven brand with more than 2.5 billion in lifetime revenue and over 200 million items donated to those experiencing homelessness. As executive chairman, he continues to shape the company's long-term strategy and steward its mission and values. Additionally, he advises growth stage founders on building enduring, purpose-driven brands and also serves on the board of a number of nonprofit organizations. And he's a dear friend, and we're also both fathers in the recent time. And so welcome, Dave, to this conversation.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So I've been kicking things off with everyone with the same prompt, which is really kind of the inquiry in Sangha itself, which is this exploration into like-minded community for this time and what that means. And so I would love to start there with you and share how community has evolved in your life, and the practice of kind of being in relation has been a part of that.
Yeah. So I found myself drawn to this inward work, perhaps, without like a ton of intention. I think it kind of found me before I found it. So I didn't grow up in a household with spiritual roots, no identity to any religion, no practice of any sort. And it wasn't really until I had started Bombas and, once the business started kind of to become a real thing, I found myself being, it comes with a lot of stress, right? And a lot of pressure. And so I found myself being inquisitive as to how the greatest leaders of this world, from presidents to other CEOs to spiritual leaders, how they all kind of managed these very large responsibilities. And the one consistent factor, or practice that I found that all of these people had, the people who I really admired at least, all had some form of meditative practice. And so, I started looking into meditation more as a tool than a practice. And I wasn't really that interested in the spirituality aspect of it. I was more like, can this help me regulate, my nervous system, all of the kind of more biomechanical, mechanical aspects of it. And the more I did it, the more I started having these kind of spiritual experiences. And I just started kind of going down the rabbit hole, and I'd find myself drawn to other people who meditated, and curious around other spiritual practices, but not identifying with any singular, practice. You have a lot of friends who were Jewish, I have friends that were Muslim, I had friends that were Christian, but I never found anybody that had kind of come to their own practice, on their own. And I think, the way that the world works in mysterious ways, I'd found myself wanting some sort of an accountability, partner or aspect of, maintaining a spiritual practice that was outside of just my own, daily practice. And, I had met a friend who was like, oh, you should talk to this guy, Jonathan Krieger. He's starting up this thing that's kind of like YPO for spirituality, or we're putting these groups together. We're going to meet once a month for 4 hours and going to talk about kind of what's going on in life, but we're all going to kind of do this, monthly practice together. And so it was this kind of longing for community that I wanted in a more approachable and intimate setting, other than, I don't know. It was like, it feels weird for me to kind of just show up at, a Buddhist, sanctuary one day, or a church, or, it's like, I don't know, just like, it felt like uncomfortable. And so this ended up being a safer space where I could ask questions and explore multiple dimensions and aspects of spirituality, that I'd always been intrigued about, and do it alongside other people who had that same intention.
Yeah, and I love the link to YPO, because there's definitely overlap with folks in Sangha that come from that place. And how do you experience the two differently?
They're similar in some nature, in terms of kind of the monthly accountability aspect of, sharing and doing kind of a group share and then a deep dive. I find that with YPO, I just think by the nature of it being, CEOs and other executives, it tends to be a little bit more solution oriented, which certainly has its place. Whereas I feel my Sangha group is more introspective, and in the share is maybe a little bit more curious and vulnerable rather than pointed. I usually come to YPO being like, here's this issue I've been dealing with. Whereas with Sangha, it's more along the lines of, here are things I've been thinking about, but I don't really know how to codify them, or these are thoughts or feelings that come up, and I don't really even know what they are, or why they come up for me in this way. So similar but different. I think they both serve a function. But I think the Sangha community, with this specific lens through spirituality, or, vibrations and energy, and, connections to the universe, that's not everyone's, I think there's certainly some of those folks in YPO, like you said, there can be an overlap, but not everybody, I'm not sure I want to sit in that space and want to be like, well, wasn't sure the vibrations, of what I was feeling were off. Whereas I feel like my Sangha group really understand, that vernacular.
Totally. Yeah, it's interesting, because most of the founders are, the folks that were like, okay, we got to create something with Sangha. it started from that similar point of like, we were in groups, we were all entrepreneurs or, doing something pretty dynamic in action in the world. And there's a lot of support for that. And it's really valid, right? That linearness that you're talking about, which I think is so often missing in more traditional spiritual groups, let's say, because they're, as you mentioned, like just showing up at a Buddhist temple, and like there's an authenticity to starting where you are, like where you're kind of in the world, and that's what we were all kind of feeling too. So and there's a place I want to go around your journey in starting the company, and there's a particular moment that is out there in the public on Shark Tank where you were, and it's one of the best episodes of Shark Tank I think you'd ever see. And it's also, I think, the most lucrative deal in the history of Shark Tank.
Yeah, the biggest company in revenue that's ever been on Shark Tank.
Wow. And there's a pretty folks can go and check it out, but there's a pretty interesting moment where you're kind of negotiating a deal and you've got a decision to make, and you kind of you're like, can I take a minute? And you go in the back and you make a decision. And I would love to get into your, like, what was going on. I was going to say your head, because I know there's this analytical aspect that we both have, and I'm sure making business decisions, there's that too, but also kind of in your body in that moment. It's like, how you came to that, like, very rapid, very consequential decision.
Yeah. So one of the things that people I think are surprised to hear is that they have the Shark Tank producers, they have a psychologist on staff to meet you when you come off of the show. And what they'd say is that they say it's not uncommon for you to walk off the show and kind of be like, what just happened? Like quite literally, like people blank. Like they're like, I don't, did we get a deal? Did we not get it? I'm totally confused. Because in that moment, when you're in there, it's such a big moment, high pressure moment. You got all these lights on you. You think that eventually this is going to, air to 15 million people. And so your adrenaline just like is on overdrive. Like it just totally like washes your system. So, I think what's interesting about that decision-making process is I think it was probably, there was definitely an analytical component to it running in the background, but it was almost primal in nature in the sense that your body, your brain, your emotions, everything is taking in all of these inputs so quickly, and you're so overwhelmed with adrenaline that you don't have the time to sit and actually process all of these individual things as they're happening. And it's kind of an amazing, like, reflection of how amazing the human body is, because like it was able to function in this high stress environment and make the correct outcome, while also feeling like I wasn't in the driver's seat, if that makes sense. Like I don't remember sitting there being like, well, let's weigh the pros and cons, just like it just is like the system is taking in all these inputs and kind of making decisions in the background, but that's not in the foreground, but somehow they're synced up. So it was a wild experience from that perspective. And so I think, you just kind of like vibe feeling, the data you're pulling in, the data you had coming into, the show. But I think at the end of the day, God, I don't know what you want to talk, like I think the systems start to work together. And kind of made the made the choice for me.
These three maybe energetic centers where we can make decisions from: our gut, or like our, deeper, more maybe primal, as you're describing, feeling. Then there's our heart, right? There's that relational, or the vibes, and then there's the head, which is a very important aspect. But in that setting, that was what I sensed in talking to you also about that moment. Like, there wasn't space for the mind. And so it's almost like a forced override of overthinking, which we can so often. I mean, I can speak for myself. Like, when given the luxury of time, an analytical mind can run rampant. And it's not always fruitful, right, in decision making, and actually just like having that short circuit in that moment to be able to be like, okay, these other sensors are what I'm gonna have to go with. And
Well, it's like the basis of Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, right? It's like your body and your brain are able to process probably so much more information and take in so much more information than whatever actually makes it to the frontal cortex, to the thought center. That he talks about these people who can just like look at a painting and be like, oh no, that's not a real painting, and you're like, but it looks to be real. How do you know? And they just say like, I can just tell, right? And it's like, because there's so many systems working on the background cohesively together. And I think that's like flow states, right? Like I think we've all been in flow states, all desire to be in more flow states. And when you're in those flow states, whether it's in music, whether it's in intimacy with another person, whether like you're not thinking through each step, you're just kind of like going through it, and it just feels so great and natural when you're in those moments. And that's kind of, I think, what that moment was for me, for sure.
the other thing I love so much about the story is this purpose-driven element that was really like at the core heart. I remember the first time we spoke and you were sharing about being in these homeless centers, and the number one thing that was requested being socks. And I'm always fascinated at these new models of purpose leveraging the power of the capitalist system that we all operate in. And really, you were pioneering that. Like, this give one get one model is out there now for sure, but at the time it wasn't. And I just like, I would love to understand that, and in your words, like where that came from, how that really informed the evolution of the company.
Yeah. Well, so to give credit where credit is due, Tom's shoes were really the kind of pioneers of the buy one give one, and then they were around kind of 4 years before us, and we're really kind of we looked at that model and they're like, wow, they're doing this with shoes. Maybe we could do this with socks. I like to say that we've kind of become the torchbearer of this movement. We're Tom's is barely around anymore. From a brand perspective, we're certainly probably the biggest, most public example of this, of this model today, which is an incredible honor and privilege. But so I took the inspiration, from Tom's, but really the moment for me was, I read this quote that said socks are the most requested clothing item at homeless shelters. And living in New York, I interacted with the homeless community on an almost daily basis. And I would, after learning this fact, I was like, well, I've donated jeans and sneakers and coats, I've done all these other, items, and I never really thought about, these kind of core necessities, these, basics like socks and underwear. And so upon hearing this, I started carrying socks around with me in my book bag, to and from the office. And the interactions that I would have with people experiencing homelessness, and in offering them a pair of socks, and just seeing oh my God, how did you know this is what I needed? I'd watch people, in the wintertime take their shoes off and have no socks, or they'd wrap plastic bags around their feet, and, all of these kind of things that would put foot hygiene at a major risk. And, they're walking everywhere, this main mode of transportation. And so they develop these foot issues. And so a clean pair of socks is kind of like, a good set of tires on your car. Like, it's kind of the thing that, keeps you grounded, to this, to the earth. And so once I started experiencing those, interactions firsthand, then became kind of the mission and purpose for me. I was like, these individual interactions with human beings, right? You can read all these stats and you can say, oh, there's this many people, but when you're having an interaction with another human being who doesn't have the basic, what you and I would deem as kind of, an everyday commodity, a pair of socks, this becomes a luxury item for these people. It puts life into perspective, amongst all the other things that, that they're struggling with or don't have. And so, that became the catalyst for saying, like, okay, well, what if we could, build on this model that Tom started, buy one, give one, would people care? And, of course we realized, okay, if we're going to, sell something great and expect to donate one, we've got to create a great product and a great brand. And, that was the hard work, that we've done over the years. But, still to this day, it's kind of the mission is the cornerstone for the reason we exist. And, our customers know it, our employees know it. I think, people who have heard of the brand know it. And, what, I look back on kind of what we built and I'm like, how awesome is it not only to build this like awesome, big, profitable, super high growth brand that most people have heard of and love and respect. But then to, look back and know that we've donated, over 200 million items of clothing. And what we learned about that was that, these were clothing items because most people don't donate used socks or even new socks for hygiene reasons. These were items that a lot of these shelters had to buy out of their own budget. And so here we're thinking, oh, we're just providing a warm, cozy pair of socks to someone who needs them. But at the size and scale that we've done it, we've probably created $400 to $600 million of budget back into this ecosystem. And at our current run rate, we're donating 30 to 40 million items a year. And so if you could apply $1 to $3 per pair, we're donating almost up to $100 million of proceeds a year. That is be hard dollars that these organizations would have had to go out and fundraise for, that they now get to repurpose. So it really is like, we thought we were putting a pebble into the pond, but then, the ripples became a lot bigger than we could have ever imagined.
Yeah, and I see them often. I'm in these circles and usually people take their shoes off. So pretty much in every circle, there's one pair of the, Bombas. And I'm like, not Dave's here. It's, but it's also really sweet to think of the fuel for that in the, feel the story of, oh, and that you kind of feel that ripple effect of like that pair of socks to someone that needed it. Yeah, and it must be great fuel for, the impact, like to have that as a driving force.
Yeah. And I mean, from a team building perspective, I think, like, if you ask anybody that works at Bombas, the number one things they say, like, I love working here because of the people, right? And I think because we're a mission-oriented brand, it kind of becomes self-selecting in the type of person that wants to work at a place that has impact beyond, just creating another product for the world or, whatever. It has real positive impact in the world. And I think that just, we talked about community before. the start of this conversation, and I think a lot of people have found very similar, like-minded people, in this environment, and so then becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of like, great people here, make great decisions, make great impact, are kind, are fun, you know. There's not a lot of space for assholes at a brand where you're giving back, and your product is something as fun and silly as a pair of socks.
Yeah. Yeah, that self-selecting notion, right? If that's the fire that's organizing, magnetizing, then it's gonna be impactful on who actually is magnetized to that beacon. Um, well, we're coming close to the end of our time. I know we could talk and we'll talk in other settings for much longer, but this last thing that we do is I'm going to draw a prompt for us and see what question we conclude. Okay, interesting. If you could go back in time, what piece of wisdom would you share with your younger self?
I think the thing, I think I probably spent way too much time, childhood, teens, 20s, um, trying to create a version of myself outwardly that other people would approve of. And, operating not wholly. I think I did a pretty good job, but definitely, was, I would, I would, I don't know if I was always showing up as my authentic self for reasons of wanting to fit in or whatever. And I think the freedom that comes with, success, and I assume at some point age, is you get the ultimate validation of you are who you are, and then everybody kind of approves of you, and it gives you the space and freedom to kind of be your true self, which is a very freeing thing. And I believe most people get there with age, because you get to a certain point, you're like, oh, what was I trying to prove? And who was I trying to prove it to? And so, yeah, I think a lot of wasted time and energy spent thinking about what other people would think, and I think that the sooner and earlier you can tap into your true self and not listen to the false self, the freer and happier you'll end up being.
Yeah. I mean, it's so hardwired into our survival, the idea of approval. I know I spent um, a lot of energy and years in that space too, of wanting to be seen in a certain way because the journey for me was because it ultimately linked to like survival and feeling worthy. And yeah, there's definitely something liberating when you can kind of let some of that go. And it's almost like there's a maturity that can happen, of course, like, so time helps. It's also true, a certain level of like success or agency can unlock, accelerate that process too, right? And um
I also think psychedelics can help get you there too. It's like you start to let go of all these stories and things you've told yourself for so long that they feel like they've become truths, and then you confront those in a and kind of they all start to seem so silly when you look at them from the outside.
yeah, the stories, the roles, the identities that we are, I'll speak for myself, that I cling to, and clinging so tight, and then you can get into these altered states. You like look at yourself, you're like, oh, look how silly I am, like holding on to this role and then of course we get back into this world, and may not be quite as firm a grasping, but we always are holding on to different roles, right?
Exactly.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, Dave. Thanks for dropping in with us.
Happy to be here.
And yeah, speak soon. Thank you for listening to Inside the Circle from Sangha. If this dialogue resonated with you, we would love to hear from you. We invite you to learn more about Sangha, our upcoming circles and events at www.sangha.one.